Hello, Synereo community, friends and allies. Thank you so much, Jim Whitescover, for inviting me to present. I hope the convergence is going really well. I've been following the Synereo journey for 3 or 4 months now, and it's definitely been an exciting ride to see. So honored and privileged to be here. I was invited to talk about governance, which I believe this is the governance convergence. And so I'm just going to take you through a presentation I've put together. So I'm John Guerin. I work primarily with the Inspiral network out of New Zealand that produces open source tools and is a network of currently 20 enterprises and about 200 contributors and members. And just off the bat, I'll say distinguishing different levels of members has been really important for the success of the Inspiral network. Having a contributor, member, and now there's a catalyst role, as well as steward roles that have recently been implemented. And all of that can be checked out at the open source, open access handbook that Inspiral has, handbook.inspiral.com, or ask me after the presentation. So just a couple examples of governance happening. Here's at the Youth UN and Podemos, the political power party in Spain. What do these all have in common? They all were using an app, Lumio, because it's open, accessible, inclusive. And this presentation won't be specifically about Lumio. Obviously, many of you are familiar with lots of different asynchronous decision-making tools. And so my comments will apply equally to all of them. But I want people to be able to leave my short talk here with good talking points for the Synereo community, as well as your home communities, your distributed groups that are associated on why do we make decisions asynchronously. And I'm sure most people are on the same page, but to say asynchronous is to say not synchronous, not live, not by Skype, not by phone. And so taking the decision out of the boardroom and into a space that is not live, basically, and giving people time to make decisions together. Again, accessible, open, inclusive, as I'll explain further. So just one of these examples, Podemos was initially the Indignados movement, or M15, which became Podemos We Can. And just kind of an example of how this is catching the power of asynchronous communications. There was no central control in terms of determining what tools. The Podemos was organizing in circles based on regions, geographic place. And so those smaller geographic circles had formed 1,000 Lumio groups within 9 months. Podemos was launched in 2014. They rose to the top of the polls in 2015. They didn't have an outrageous success, but for a starting political party, I would say it was quite an astounding victory. They won 73 seats at the first big election. There's a quote from Ben Knight of Lumio: "How do we maximize coordination while minimizing coercion?" And I know this is, I think, a conversation that Synereo folks have a lot of values that pertain to you all. So I'm going to basically start talking just briefly about my experience with agreement-based organizing or consent-based decision-making, go into asynchronous decision-making, and if we have time, talk just a little bit about open money, which is kind of the same principles but applied to numbers. So agreement-based organizing, reciprocal understanding of the expectations of 2 or more people. Pretty evident. So my background, I've been working in community organizing for a little over 6 years with several now 7 different projects that have used horizontal decision-making processes. I used to call it consensus. I've moved away from that to consent-based, just to give this idea that it's not that you accept something or think it's the best idea necessarily, it's that you're giving consent to something. And this is important because, especially when you're making decisions with a lot of people, to keep things moving forward, you know, sometimes you have to compromise and kind of sacrifice your personal self-interests in favor of the interests of the group at the moment, knowing that things can be changed later. So that's a really important piece, I think. And I mean, one example, within the Inspiral community, we have 200 people making decisions where any one person can block the process. And so, you know, I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind is, like, these are not just techniques, not just mechanistic techniques, but really social practices that take time to develop within any group or community at any, you know, fractal level of an organization, is learning how to let go and join the crowd when the moment's right to keep the movement going, because nothing's worse than having spent, I'm sure you've had the experience, hours and hours on something, and then you know, it gets blocked, maybe by one person, maybe by a section, however your voting works, doesn't matter much. And so then all of those hours are not necessarily wasted, but to a degree they could be, when instead perhaps things could have gone forward and been modified as motion kept going. Also, feel free to interrupt with questions. This is informal, maybe not too many since I got short time, but I'll take them as we go. So this was one of the first consent-based protocols that I was using. It's been modified a bit since this, but just a general introduction of proposal, discussion of the proposal, call for concerns is kind of the big difference, rather than who approves, who disapproves or has a concern with it. And then if there's standing concerns or a block, that would kill a proposal. And so this is important because, you know, looking at Synereo as commons, a communication commons, or as, you know, a publicly owned good that does have, you know, reduction of use per members. There's a certain amount of bandwidth, there's a certain amount of attention, as you know, the attention economy. So it's important, like, a lot of the biggest conflicts are going to involve shared resources, especially in regards to ownership, identity, what is this platform about, and the access to use it. And so I don't personally believe that written consent is necessary for all things, but in these cases, especially for restrictive agreements, or like restricted to say, like, making decisions around unitive resources. So like, this particular tool cannot be used in 2 places at once, or we have $10 in the budget, $10,000 in the budget. Those $10,000 can only be used in one place, or, you know, each dollar can only be used in one place. So this also applies to communication tools, social resources. What's the purpose and nature? What's the identity of a specific group? Who owns the MailChimp? Who, like, dictates what the style is there? You know, some of these things are useful for having written agreements about, especially when there's persistent confusion or conflicts around it. Having that documentation can be really valuable. So, I mean, it's already interactions that you do, probably to some degree or another. So this is just kind of a framework to help you think about it. And I can share this, or I have shared the slideshow with Christian. There's a link to, I worked with Gregory Castle on the agreement-based organizing, so you can see that framework, which is a modular, open source, do what you will with it, non-prescriptive framework for agreement-based organizing. So Lumio vision is create a world where it's easy for anyone to participate in the decisions that affect them. Here's Lumio as an infographic. Maybe some of you are familiar with the platform, but it's just like any group messaging forum that you've seen, but with a decision-making tool. Anyone can start a proposal, and then people say yay, meh, nay, or block it, and you get a handy pie chart at the end. I won't spend time on this. You can take a look later. Why asynchronous? That unhurried decision-making online on your time. Lumio's proposal is that this increases collective intelligence. So enough time for everyone to say their piece, feel inclusion, belonging. Maybe it gives people time to make less inflammatory statements. You know, after you type up your tirade, you might look at it and be like, well, maybe not. Or there's an edit button. You can even change your mind during the proposal before the proposal is over. Obviously, for different decisions, different proposal time lengths are going to make sense. Or not having edit capabilities. I mean, there's definitely, I believe this to be non-prescriptive. So yeah, access across barriers. This is less pertinent to a group that's largely decentralized like Synereo. But I think the big one for Synereo is this idea that, you know, there's meetings, at least during my time with the community leaders program, where decisions could be made in like a Skype meeting or a Zoom meeting. And I guess I would suggest that there's a lot of benefit to taking that decision and putting it into a voting mechanism outside of that meeting. Because this, again, leads to collective intelligence with that unhurried time for people to build consensus amongst each other and for the best ideas to really surface rather than people feeling pressure to just go with something at the time. So I know I've got only 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to open up for questions and I'll skip this portion of the thing.